So I think we had decided ahead of time this time that we would look at Isaiah 53. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this, and we probably could start in 52:13. So that, behold, my servant shall prosper; he will be high and lifted up, and exceedingly mighty, etc. But we'll just start with chapter 53. So, Chris, I wondered if you would try to read verse 1 for us and translate that.
Sure. Thank you. See, me, min, lish, mua, thenu, lish, mua, thenu, uze, roa, Yahweh, al, min, or I'm sorry, al, me, niglatha.
Okay.
Okay. So who, me, Amos, believed, who has believed, who, and then us. I know it from memory, but I don't see it, but it must be report.
Yeah,
Our report.
news, it's, yeah. Okay.
Yep. Who's Roa? So Roa is arm. And the arm of Yahweh. Al, on or upon. Me, who. Neglatha. Is that Nifl? Gala.
Yeah.
To uncover.
One?
To uncover.
Yes, to uncover. Right. To whom is the arm of Yahweh, or to whom is Yahweh's arm uncovered? Would be the idea. Okay. Thank you, Chris. So let's talk about this verse a little bit. So he begins here with a couple rhetorical questions, probably connected to the previous verse. So in 13, or 15 rather, of 52, he says, so he will sprinkle many nations concerning him. Let's see. Kings will shut their mouths for that which has not been recounted to them. They see, and what they have not heard, they discern, or they perceive. Okay, so let me set this up because it's a little bit complicated, but I think what he's doing is he's moving from, in the first few verses, he's talking about the Messiah, and I'll just read the ESV to get the context. Behold, my servant shall act wisely, he shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. And many were astonished at you. His appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they see, and that which they have not heard they understand. And then he says, who has believed what we have heard, or our news, our message, our report? I don't know if I can ask this question in a way that will foster discussion or make sense, but what do you think is the nature of the rhetorical question here? Who is he talking to? Who's our report? And when he's saying who has believed, is this expecting a negative answer? No one has believed? Or what do you think? What is verse 1 telling us, or its meaning?
Is it asking the Jewish nation who's believed the report from the Old Testament of who he is, who the servant is?
Yes. So that's I think what I would understand is happening here. When we get a little bit further in the passage, I take the view that Charles Feinberg took, which is that this chapter, in some cases, some parts of the passage represents the prayer Israel is praying at the end of the age when they recognize Jesus as Messiah. All we like sheep have gone astray. And so I think Isaiah here is shifting from the nations have looked at the Messiah and they've come to understand his significance, who he is. And now in verse 1, it seems he's turning back to the Jewish people and he's saying, who among us has believed? Who here has heeded the message? Because then he's going to specify in the coming verses that the Messiah is specifically a Jewish Messiah who comes from the land of Israel, in which it's sort of a spiritually parched ground from which he comes, because the people of Israel don't recognize him. They aren't spiritually being faithful to the covenant, and yet he flourishes and thrives in that kind of an environment. So the way I would understand it is verse 1 is shifting focus back from those kings that have received the atoning benefit of the Messiah, the suffering servant, now to the Jewish people specifically, saying, who among us has heeded this message, and who has really understood the power of the Lord? To unveil the arm of the Lord, the arm signifies his power, his agency. So who really understands this revelation of God's power? As we'll see, rather than being astounded like the nations were, they were astonished at him. The Jewish people will reject him. They will consider him despised and forsaken, struck down by God. So I think all that to say, I see his attention now turning back to the nation of Israel, and particularly, in a sense, looking eschatologically at the Jewish people's rejection of the Messiah, and then at their future reception of the Messiah. And so Isaiah 53, in a sense, telescopes the relationship between the Jewish nation and Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, throughout her existence from the first century to the end of time. So anyway, that's how I would understand it. Okay, let's go to Ron. Would you look at verse 2 for us?
Yes. Via all ka yonek le fa non v'kasho resh me'eretz ya lo toar lo velo hadar venereahu va lo mara or mare marach va na or vane med who.
Okay.
And to go or and up to go up, like key like plant before his, or to grow up like a plant before his face. And like a root from the ground, or a young plant, I suppose.
Yeah.
Like a root from the ground. And see.
The word sia is parched or dry, so it's describing Eretz.
Okay.
It's from a parched ground or dry
Parched ground. Okay. And then not from see. Not from majesty or
Yeah, so it's no form. That word to'er or to'er looks like a verb, but it's actually a noun. So no form to him, or he has no form, and
okay,
no majesty in the next line.
and no majesty. To see or to look at, no majesty to look at, and no beauty and, well, something about us desiring him or to make us desire him. Although I'm getting that out of memory, but yes.
Right. So yes, he has no form or splendor, majesty that we should behold him or look at him, and no appearance that we should desire him is kind of the sense
Yep.
there. No visage, no appearance that we would desire him. Okay, so what does this mean here? Does this mean that the Messiah, well, let's take it in a couple parts here. So he grows up as a shoot before him, as a root from parched ground. What does that mean, do you think? What's the sense of the plant imagery here?
Struggling. He didn't grow up in the palace. He grew up.
Yeah, he's, yep.
Okay, so
So, I mean, as a
he
normal person, not wealthy, not with all the accoutrements. Dad was a
Vulnerable.
carpenter, struggled in ways,
okay, so like a hard scrabble
There you go.
childhood.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable.
Okay.
Like a root in the middle of a driveway. There's,
Right.
It's dry ground or something.
Yeah, I mean, those things are true. We know of the Messiah. I think also the idea of a shoot and a root tie into a common way of describing David's dynasty
Mhm.
as a branch or a shoot that would come up. I'm thinking particularly, I
The
was
root of
looking this
Jesse.
up. The Isaiah 11:1, a shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him. So I think there may also be a sense here that he's a descendant of David that seems to come from a time in which David's line has lost its luster, or there's a sense in which perhaps David won't actually have a descendant. I mean, it's very clear in the Davidic covenant that God's going to establish his seed, his dynasty. He's, we talked about that he wants to build God a house, and God says, no, I'm going to build you a house. But then we go historically through the curse on Jeconiah, and I think we talked about that in this class, right? Where it's write this man down as childless. And then Haggai ends with Zerubbabel, being chosen as a signet ring, whereas with Jeconiah, it was said, if you were a signet ring on my finger, I would cast you off, I would throw you out. So all that to say, there's probably some question about the longevity and the fertility of the Davidic line. And so he's coming in a time when one may have questions about that. So that might be what the parched earth, maybe it's talking about the spiritual state of Israel, but it seems elsewhere that Isaiah talks about the Davidic dynasty in similar terms, like a plant. But then he has no appearance. Does this mean the Messiah is homely? When I was a young kid, I read it this way, thinking it must mean he just really wasn't good looking. Like, is that what this is talking about? Any thoughts about what does it mean he doesn't have majesty or an appearance that we should desire him?
It's not physically obvious that, here's the Messiah.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it has to do with his stately bearing, the sort of pomp and circumstances that would accompany a traditional king. He doesn't have all the trappings of royalty and splendor. He grows up in sort of a backwater town. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? He doesn't carry those royal demeanor, disposition that a king's son might have. So he comes from very humble origins, even, being forced to go down to Egypt and then come back to Egypt, growing up in Nazareth, which we'll probably get into when we talk about Isaiah, but the prophecy in chapter 7 about eating curds and honey, what does that mean? Well, if you take it in the context of 7:21 and 22, it means a time of deprivation, a time in which they're forced to wean themselves off agricultural kinds of crops and food and eat curds and honey. So anyway, all that to say, he's coming from challenge and from a context in which it doesn't seem that he has a royal standing. So I think that's principally what it means here. All right. Let's go. Britton, would you do 3 for us?
Sure. Oh, just to finish, I'd say the last part of 53:2 is he wasn't like Saul or somebody that everyone looked at and said, this must be the king type idea. Would you say that for there's no beauty or attractiveness? We should desire him. It follows no form.
Yeah,
Possibly.
I think, yeah, maybe. I mean,
and he was a normal looking guy. I always thought he was a fine looking man, but he wasn't, he was just a normal looking guy. He wasn't this, the Times top most handsome guy of the year, 10 years in a row, whatever type thing.
right. Like people wouldn't be grabbing him for selfies kind of thing. He doesn't have,
Right.
he doesn't necessarily have something that would be a magnetic. In a sense, he was magnetic. I mean, there were crowds following him wherever he went. So I don't want to overstate it. I guess that's what I'm trying to be careful about is I tended when I was younger to overstate this, to say, well, he must have been a homely, unattractive, undesirable. And I don't think that's what it's saying. It's just saying that he doesn't have all the trappings that one might associate with power, prestige, and all that. He comes from humble origins. You wouldn't pass him on the street thinking that's
Yeah.
the savior of the world kind of a thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. 53:3. Nipza va Hadal. Ishim.
Ishim. Yep.
Ishim. Ish. Mako. Boat. Mako boat. Mako boat.
Vote.
Okay.
Vidua.
Vidua. Holi.
Holy.
K master. Master. Yeah. Panim. Face.
Master.
Mimen new. Oh, that doggish is throwing me off. Okay, yeah. Mimen, right. Okay. Nipza velo Habsab nahu. Habsab nahu.
Yeah. Kashav Nuhu. Kashav Nuhu.
Habsab nuhu.
Yeah.
Habsab nuhu. Okay, that flows better.
Okay.
I like that.
All right.
And I know some of this, but he is held in derision, despised, rejected of man.
Yep.
Ish, a man. And I know he's of sorrows and known of grief, known to have grief. What's that word?
Yeah, he's
to know grief, acquainted.
Yeah, he understands grief, or he's familiar with grief is kind of the idea.
Right. And then he was hiding and as how's that end? Masculine compound. As we hid our face, men from him, again, despised, not, and I know this, we did not esteem him.
Yep.
We esteemed him not.
We did not regard him or reckon him to be worthy as is his due. Okay, so building then on the statements about his lack of majesty, here it even intensifies it a little bit more. Not only does he not have the trappings of royalty, but in fact he's rejected by the people. So they as you said, Britton, that's a good translation. They held him in derision or regarded him as contemptible. They despised him, and he was rejected, spurned by men. So he's going to be a polarizing figure. In other words, he's going to, on the one hand, be regarded as contemptible by many, even though we know also that there are the common people hear him gladly in the Gospels because he doesn't have the trappings of royalty. You know, the Pharisees are elitists. You know, they're charmers, as I like to say, when they say things like, you know nothing at all. You know, like really nice guys. So they're elitists who are power hungry, and the Messiah is not going to be that way. He's going to be really almost scorned, rejected, and because of that, he's a man associated with pain. This is why, in some ways, Jeremiah prefigures the Messiah, the weeping prophet. That one of the reasons I think Matthew likes to quote Jeremiah is seeing him as, you know, fulfilling this picture of a suffering servant. But he's a man of griefs or pain or suffering, and familiar with grief, or that word hali is sort of like sickness or disease. It's usually someone who is beset by some kind of a disease. So he understands sickness. And you know, the theological question I got asked when I was preparing for ordination is, you know, is there healing in the atonement? And the answer is yes, but not necessarily in a signs and wonders sort of way. But he provides healing because he takes our diseases upon him. This is the substitutionary atoning work of the Messiah. So he's familiar with disease, and even though he's rejected and despised, and we wouldn't have thought he's the guy, we may not have picked him as the one to lead. All right, you guys have any other thoughts on this verse?
On that phrase there, and as one from whom men hide their faces, I'm assuming it's saying that because the sorrows and grief are so striking that people would look away or not want to keep looking at what he was going through. It's surprising to me that even though this is so many thousand years back, that like that's still common human behavior. Like people would behave that way now. I mean, how some things we might read in the Old Testament, it's different. Like the whole thing with the shoe, where they took one of their shoes off when like in Ruth, when the guy takes his shoe off to seal the covenant or to seal the agreement. Like that's completely foreign to us, but this is very common, like human behavior, the same as people would be now, where they'd like want to shy away from looking at something really bad or difficult or painful.
Yeah,
I find that
yeah,
interesting that it's so natural human behavior.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ron. We have this sense of awkwardness, and we just sort of you know, just kind of like avoid that kind of a thing. And so, yeah, as you're saying, the hiding of the face, we don't necessarily say it that way, but just sort of like look away, or you know, I can't watch this kind of a thing. So it is a natural human reaction. Okay.
Dr. Dunham.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Who's next? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Michael.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have to go through the audio aids since we have a general community problem. But I was inquiring, Doc, about the use of the nifar. It's so consistent so much in this verse. What would be your take on it? Is it emphasizing the intensity of the response of the people towards him? Anyway, I was just inquiring.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I think maybe it's related to the fact that this prophecy is addressing the nation primarily. And so in that sense, you know, the agent is unspecified. He's despised. He's this, he's that. So it's sort of like picturing him in his first coming as largely the recipient of scorn rather than praise. And so maybe that's a reason. I'd have to think a little bit more about that, but it seems to perhaps emphasize that. Chris, you had a comment? Or
I was just going to suggest that because this section is to the Jews and who's believed our report, so it's the Jewish people who are rejecting Jesus' presentation, and not only his presentation, but they're rejecting him. And so he is sorrowed and he is grieved by this offer that he's giving the Jews, and they're categorically rejecting him. It would be my thought.
yeah, it's good.
Dr. Dunham, could you comment on the comparison, contrast, or parallel between the phrase man of suffering and acquainted with illness? Are they the same? Are they different? Is it referring to different aspects of the emotional makeup of the human constitution? What would you say?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I wouldn't want to draw too fine or large a distinction between the phrases since they are parallel. So they're probably amplifying each other. I would understand the first one as, ish makovot is sort of the idea of he's characterized by pain and by suffering. So we know this, like Hebrew likes to do ish and then something. He's a man of war. He's a man of this or that, and that's sort of someone who's characterized by whatever quality this is. So he's characterized by pain on the one hand, and then that gets amplified a little bit to mean he's, the older translation, acquainted with, but really it's the idea of yada can mean to know, but also to understand, to perceive, to grasp. So I think it means he's experienced with sickness, or he's familiar with sickness. So he understands its nature because he himself has gone through it. This is drawing this really vivid portrait of a sympathetic sin bearer who's
Okay,
experienced all these things.
so here's my question.
Okay.
Did the Lord ever have a common cold?
I mean, would we say that it's sinful to have one? I don't think it would be inconsistent with impeccability. I don't know. Do you have a thought about that?
I think so.
I mean, he
Yeah,
died as
he was just like a human being.
right. He had human blood. It was, he didn't have some kind of special human nature apart from the fact that he was sinless. He was
Yeah.
truly human.
He got bug bites.
Yeah.
Got tired. He got hungry.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree with you. If you think about it, did he ever smash his thumb when he was a carpenter? Did you ever get a common cold? Did you ever take antibiotics? Did you ever have appendicitis? All the things you can imagine.
Right.
And I think from the humanity aspect, as you cited, the immunological status of a human being, it would be susceptible. But I just hesitate. I mean, it's not really something you can be dogmatic on. So I kind of think it could happen, but I just don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have that specifically mentioned that I can think of an example, but we do have fatigue, hunger, those
Thirst.
sorts of things, thirst. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a good question. All right, Steve, you want to try number 4 for us?
Yeah, let me scroll where I need to be. Okay. Speaking of which, I just had a bunch of shots yesterday, and so I'm slightly feverish. So
Okay.
All right. Gen. Let's see. That's hard. Hale, Haleyenu.
Yeah, halayenu. Yep.
Haleyenu. Thank you. I had the wrong accent. Who? Nasa. umach ovenu, wanahu, hashavu, hashav nuhu, nagua,
Mhm.
muke,
Mhm.
Elohim. Ame une.
Okay.
Okay. Going back, lost my spot. All right. And he was, but he was wounded, right? Oh,
No,
sorry.
I think you're doing the next verse. So it's
Sorry,
Cain surely.
yeah, here we go. Surely our, that's plural, our illnesses, sicknesses,
Yes.
he lifted,
Yep. He
he
carried.
lifted up. Oh,
lifted
carried,
away.
that's
Yep.
it. He carried or lifted, and like he lifted up our pain, suffering. He lifted up our suffering and carried them. He, I guess, bore our suffering and carried them, and we.
Yep.
And we regarded, considered
Yep.
him struck or beaten. We considered him struck, beaten by God. That one's tough. Afflicted.
Yeah. Afflicted from ana, right? To be afflicted. Okay. Very good. So, building off the last word of verse 3, which is kashavnuhu, we regarded him. We did not regard him. Now, coming into this verse and to follow, there's the first person plural, a succession of verbs here. Surely our sicknesses he carried, and our pains or sufferings he bore. And it's a word that sort of means to labor under something, or to carry something that's heavy, is the kind of the connotations. And we regarded him, and then a series of 3 statements here, uh, sort of like smitten, touched, or smitten. And then naka, this muke, I probably would translate that something like struck down by God. And that sort of naka, usually in the book of Joshua, for instance, means to strike in a fatal sense, to kill someone, that is to strike them down. So we regarded him as punished by God, struck down by God, and afflicted. So this is sort of prophesying the Jewish regard for Jesus as, rightly rightly punished by God, killed by God, because he claims to be something that we reject him from being. This is sort of what the Jewish leaders are saying. So they regard him as justly struck down by God and afflicted. All right, Kimby, are you able to read verse 5 for us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. Verse 5. Vahu maholel mi peshe enu
Yes.
ma meduki Meduka,
Meduka. Mhm.
me, ma, me avonotenu,
Yes, good.
musar,
Mhm.
num, sh, shalonenu, shalomenu, al, 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 ale, uvahan, rato, nep, nep, nepalenu.
Good.
So kind of already memorized this verse, so that's
Yes,
helpful.
yes, yeah.
But he is wounded for transgression, broken or bruised
Yep.
for our iniquity. Is that instruction, the word?
Yeah, musar,
Okay,
chastisement,
yeah.
correction, or
Chastisement,
instruction. Yeah.
instruction of our peace upon him.
Mhm.
And with his stripes we are healed.
Right. Very good. Okay, so going on from there, reckoning him as struck down by God, then Isaiah moves, and this is the gospel, right? This is a majestic way of describing it, the sin-bearing atoning work of Jesus, the Messiah. He was wounded, and this is a word that often has the connotations of being slain. So if you're wounded in this sense, it's usually a fatal blow. So he is wounded to the point of death, really, for our transgressions, crushed. This is a word used of a moth being crushed in the book of Job. So he's pulverized because of our iniquities, or for our iniquities. The next phrase is a challenging one, but it's sort of chastisement that results in our peace, or the correction that brings about shalom for us is upon him. So God has placed on him the correction so as to bring about shalom for us, well-being, and by his stripes, really his wounds, the blows upon him, healing comes to us. All right. Then verse 6, Andrew, do you want to take that one for us?
Kulanu, Katsun, Ta Irnu, Ish, Hidaku, Pinenu, Fa'adonai, Hifkia, Bo Etz Aon, Kulanu.
Good.
See. All of us, like sheep. Let's see here. Guess I'm just trying to the gender number to match.
Okay.
All of us like sheep. It looks something like you have transgressed or something like that.
It's it's a cal perfect, because the top there is part of the root, and then the noon at the end there puts it in the 1 CP. So it's we have wandered off,
Okay.
ta
Okay.
inun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
Um, each man. Let's see, Derek. I think it's kind of an idiom. I know I memorized it his own way, but it's like the way of his face or something like that.
Yes, I think the sense here is each to his way we have turned. So something
Okay.
like that. We've set ourselves on a course following our own path.
Okay. And the Lord has put on him the transgression of all of us or of us all.
Yeah, very good. Okay, it's an interesting word here after va Adonai, hif gia. So and the Lord, it's not really seem, which we might expect in the sense of placing, but it's a word that means to make, to touch, or to intercede. So it's, I guess we could say laid, but it's not the usual word for laid. So
Entreat.
it's sort of like maybe has more of this intercessory connotation that he's selected him and handpicked him to be the one to bear this. So he's touched him with the iniquity of us all is kind of the idea.
Would it be he is our entreaty or he is entreated for us type of idea?
So explain that, Britton. Like,
Mediatorially, I mean, because that it's laid upon him, but because of that, he is entreating for us.
right,
I
as an
was looking at
intercessor.
how to a different way than laid because the word does have a nuance of entreating or make intercession.
Right.
Yeah, I was just asking. He is our entreaty because without him, our sins are not made intercession for.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't work. I'm just looking at my own translation, working it through. So
Yeah. Yeah. So the Halot, for instance, says intercede for as the gloss for this because it's the Hifil. So Yahweh intercedes for him, the iniquity of us all. I don't know, that seems, I don't know, that's a tough sense to make of it. I don't know.
yeah, okay.
Maybe I'm
Thank
missing
you.
something, but I see what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out how to render this smoothly in English, but it's something about he urges upon him as an intercessor the
Right.
sins
I
of
think
all of us.
intercession is better. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Good. All right. Michael, are you able to come on the mic to read 7?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, very good.
Verse 7. Nigas. Bahu. Nane. Lo. Yipach. Yev. Kashe. Atebach. Yobal. Ukrachel. Ipnei. Was Zicha. Neichlama. Hello. Yiptach. Yev.
Good.
Gosh. So he was oppressed
Hmm.
and afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth,
Yes.
like sheep was led to the slaughter,
Yes.
and as the sheep before, its shearers is silent. And he opened not his mouth.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we have this repeated phrase here, he did not open his mouth. So this idea of being silent in the face of the scorn and the oppression, the injustice. So he's oppressed, this idea of justice being robbed from him and afflicted, but he didn't open his mouth. He's like a seh, and I think if I remember that, that's the word Abraham uses in Genesis 22 when he says God will provide a lamb. So he's like a lamb being led to the slaughter. He's led along, and as a sheep before it shears, he is silent, does not open his mouth. So I don't know if I fully grasp the intent here of Isaiah, other than to say it seems that he's unusual in the sense that he doesn't seek to justify himself. He's a sufferer who suffers without maligning his enemies. He's not taking an opportunity to speak out against his enemies. He's simply receiving their vitriol, but not returning evil against them. So he's maintaining his righteous stance even when injustice is wrought upon him. So he's unique in that sense, unusual. All right. So
ask a question.
Yeah.
So he was silent, or like a sheep, he was silent before his shearers.
Mhm.
Sheep aren't normally silent when they get, maybe they're making a lot of noise. I'm not sure, but I think this Savior, this servant, knew exactly what was happening to him, and he intentionally did not. He refused to open his mouth and to say negative about them.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it maybe speaks of his vulnerability, and yet he's he's intentionally placing himself under God's hand in this way, rather than, as he says, he could have called on the angels of heaven to deliver him, but he submits himself to the Father's hand, like Isaac does in Genesis 22. So,
May I share something that might give some color? Back early in my career, I was litigated. And when I was litigated, I noticed the great, or the arguments were to manipulate and, if not violate, all the principles of medicine. And I was very upset with that, because I spent a large portion of my life studying medicine, and then I have an attorney that hasn't studied medicine, has Googled it, and then tells me it was wrong. I can only imagine how that would have been for the Savior, who really, if you could say it this way, authored the law, and then to watch the law be shredded right in front of him. I think in John 18, there's at least 7 things that happened there that violated the law. And yet I wanted with all of my might to defend myself and to take that attorney and boil him down to nothing. And yet when I noticed the Savior, he didn't do that. He had all the knowledge and understanding of exactly what he meant, and he held himself at bay. And then I was reading in Acts, and probably some of the same people were kind of telling Paul off and told somebody to slap him. And Paul, with his razor sharp mind, blurts out exactly the crime that was committed. And of course, he was appropriately rebuked, and he responded. And I realized how hard that must have been for the Savior to have kept his mouth shut, as it was so difficult for me and this attorney who wanted to sue me. And that's how I view this, before the oppression and the kangaroo court and the lies. And he stands for absolute perfect truth and integrity. And to hold his tongue, that was a feat. finally my attorney had to tell me I needed to just follow his lead. The end of that story was simple. The Lord took care of my problem, and I never, ever gave a deposition to anybody about the case. So I always associated that as a very close parallel, which reflects that which is in 1 Peter 2.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. I've thought about this too, because this is my own take on it, is if I were in a similar situation and observing Jesus doing this, my inclination, at least I think, would be something along the lines of, well, why don't you say something? Like, if you don't say something, you're almost implying they're right. You're almost seeming to allow them to have the last word, almost as if it's an admission by silence of guilt. And yet he doesn't respond to them, which seems to indicate something of his transcendence, something of his, you know, I don't know. There's a mystery here. I'll just say it that way, that, you know, within the context of the injustice he's suffering, he willingly submits to it rather than speaking out against them, which not only is a natural human inclination, but we might even see as a positive if injustice is being done.
I think some of the older writers would call this meekness, strength under perfect control. And the only verse that I can find that tells me what was going on in the Lord's head was this one. And he committed himself to him who judges righteously.
Right.
I mean, incredible perseverance of faith at that point to say to his father, this situation, although drastically wrong, I'm going to entrust that you'll eventually make it right. And I don't know. Those are my little meager thoughts on that, but it's been a big mystery for me.
Yeah, it's amazing. Good.
And also,
Right. Anybody else have a thought? Or yeah, Michael?
yeah, can we compare and contrast it with his posture before Pilate, in that he did not respond to some of the accusations that were brought by the Sanhedrin? Also, could we say that his silence was a posture that was indicating he was willing to bear this transgression and our griefs? Just thinking.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's part of, so if I'm understanding you right, it's in a sense part of his sin-bearing priestly ministry is even his refusal to answer these charges brought against him. So he's bearing our sin in that sense. Let me end this, and unless there are other questions or thoughts,
I just I have to say, it's almost like, you know, when he posed to Pilate, you know, him being the truth, and Pilate asked what is truth, que veritas. It's almost like he knew that they wouldn't hear him. Of course, it's all prophetic and everything, and all those other points are right. But if he spoke the truth, it was going on deaf ears. They had already shut down truth. He was truth. And part of it was, I'll just not throw even these truth pearls before you as swine, and you'll be judged. And I think in 1 Peter 2, and it says he allowed God to who would judge righteously. I have nothing to say, you won't hear it. Idea.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Pilate is the scoffer, and there's a principle: answer not a fool according to his folly. That, you know, you do answer a fool in some cases if there's hope for the fool, but in other cases you just don't even answer a fool according to his folly, so that you don't become like him. I think that the idea of you don't get down in the mud and wrestle with a pig, because you come out of that dirty, and the pig likes it. So anyway, okay, I just wanted to end with verse 11 and its implications. So let me just read this one, and just we'll end our textual discussion with this one. Me'amal nafsho yir'ah yish ba bech dachto yet Sadiq Avdi Laravim Ve'evo Notam Hu Yisbol. So from the travail, the labor of his soul, he will see. And the Dead Sea Scrolls add there, he will see light, which may be a reference to the resurrection. He will see light. He will be satisfied, Yisba. By his knowledge, the righteous one will justify, my servant, my righteous servant will justify many, and their iniquities he will bear. And this is the hope of the gospel, is through his suffering, he sees uh, the end, if you will, the end. So, I think there's a sense in which he sees the multitude for whom he's suffering as he dies on the cross. And this is a great comfort of the gospel, that um, he understands he's bearing our sins on the tree, and it's pretty remarkable prophecy. So one of the most unique ones in the Old Testament, such that if you just read it to people unfamiliar with the Bible, they might think you're reading from the New Testament. That's how vivid this portrayal is, and it's pretty remarkable. So thanks for meditating on it and reading it through with me. I appreciate it. So let's take our break at this point, and when we come back, we're going to delve a little bit into Isaiah. We're not going to be able to cover the whole book because of the nature of the book, but I want to at least try to give some historical background, talk about maybe the literary structure, and then talk about a few interpretive issues. I imagine chapter 7 would be one that might come up about the prophecy about Emmanuel. So looking at some different interpretive issues in the book and such. So, all right, we'll do that after our break. So let's take about a 5 to 10 minute break here.
Hi, Steve. Enjoy your meal. Is that your dog in the background? You're mute.
I'm sorry I'm eating in front of you.
It's okay.
That is one of my dogs. We have 2 dogs.
Looks cute.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. We just had a temporal power problem in our community. I think the transformer broke down.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So there's no light.
Hmm. Well, that's our loss because we'd love to see you.
I'm sorry. Next time. At least I'm seeing you.
Yeah, thank you. How are your studies going?
Yeah, moving on step by step. Schedules here and there, but next
Hmm.
time.
Is your family doing well?
Oh, yes, please.
Wonderful.
Just took my girl and the extended family to school today.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
They just reported back to school today or
Oh,
yesterday.
okay. Yeah.
Now 4 here.
Hmm. How is the ministry at the church going?
Well, we thank God. We're growing.
Good.
We also 28th, starting a Bible school for pastors and church leaders to help.
Hmm. Good.
I think that's a
Very
great
good.
need enough.
Hmm. Sorry, I'm eating in front of you, Doctor.
Oh, no, that's okay.
No trouble. I'm okay. Yeah, it's morning.
Bringing up my notes here. All right, let me just ask you guys, I guess we'll start this next segment by asking you a general question. This maybe is hard to answer in a larger way, but what would you say are some of the interpretive issues when we come to the book of Isaiah and beyond Isaiah to the prophets? This course is the prophets, but up to this point, we've been looking at the prophets as in what we might call the historical narratives. And now we're
Mhm.
coming into, the capital P prophets, Isaiah and company. And so thinking about Isaiah and then beyond Isaiah, thinking about um, the larger scope of prophetic material, what are some of the challenges that we might face with this material? Any thoughts? Anybody want to share?
Well, always I think we have to be careful what's proleptic it's and not, what to make sure it's really foretelling. or if it's only narrative telling, or, you know, making sure we're as careful with that so that not everything's prophetic, but enough is, we're not missing it at the same time.
Okay, right. So knowing, you know, I don't think I have that book right here with me, but Eric Tully wrote a recent book called Reading the Prophets as Christian Scriptures, as Christian Scripture, and he argues, and it's not necessarily a new concept, but I think it's a helpful one, that prophets often talk about things in the near horizon, the far horizon, and then the distant horizon. So at times they'll telescope what might seem like the distant and the far horizon, sort of as if they're one, but then also be saying some things in the immediate context that's more about the near horizon. This is part of the challenge with Isaiah 7, just to use an example, because if you look at the whole flow of the passage, chapter 8 seems to suggest the child is being born within that context of Isaiah's day. So that has led a lot to question, well, what exactly then does Isaiah 7 mean about this child? So understanding that property can be challenging for sure. All right, any other thoughts?
Isn't now this might be related, but speaking in the tense and the form as if it already happened. That perfect, is it future perfect or something? And sometimes I have trouble delineating it. Now that might be what you're referring to or related to it, but
right. So this so-called prophetic perfect, where it seems to speak of the future in the perfect, or what we might call the past tense. So understanding what is future and what has to do with the past. I mean, this is different from the book of Isaiah, but I think of Zechariah as an example.
Zechariah is what
yeah, Zechariah will talk about things that nearly every commentary you read will suggest is something about his present day because of the language used. And I would almost always conclude that it's actually about a distant day. It's about a future day. So understanding that, you know, the verb tenses, and I don't necessarily like to call them tenses, but conjugations can seem to suggest past, when in reality he's envisioning the future and seeing something ahead. So yeah.
Yeah.
Other thoughts about Isaiah?
You know what something that I enjoy, but I think can be a little, well, I don't know if difficult's the right word, is like in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, when you switch from the local ruler, let's say Tyre, to Satan, and you see, okay, where is that break? I think that's fun to do. I'm just saying it's something you develop as you study, saying, oh, here's that break between the Prince of Tyre and Satan, or, you know.
Yeah. Like in the book of Daniel, where he talks about the king of the north, and then suddenly he seems to be talking about the Antichrist.
Right.
Or yeah, Ezekiel 28, is he talking about Lucifer, or is he talking about the king of Tyre? So sometimes understanding that projection. That also happens in the Isaiah passage, because I think Isaiah is, my own take on this is, Isaiah is making a predictive prophecy about the future, because he's addressing the house of David, but then seems to switch within that context. And that's where it gets complicated. He seems to switch back to the immediate context and sees a fulfillment there. And I largely am sympathetic to Ray Delnick's treatment of the passage in this book. If you read that, I can't remember if that was part of your reading, but I think he's in the main on the right track with that. There are still some challenges. It's not all, it's not an easy one to solve, but you know, that's kind of how I take it. So yeah, seeing that going back and forth, and we have to really be sensitive to plural versus singular pronouns, understanding that subtle shifts in language, introducing a referent that hasn't been mentioned before can change now the scope of it. So those are all things we have to really, it's an art and a science, but getting accustomed to how prophets can use that language.
Exactly.
All right, anything else come to mind? Chris?
So You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
I had to switch my headset, it died. 1 Peter 1:10 and 11 talks about, of this salvation the prophets have inquired and searched carefully, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you, searching what manner of time the Spirit of Christ who was in them, indicating that he testified beforehand of the sufferings of Christ and the glories that would follow. It's interesting to me that Peter is giving us a clue that these prophets were thinking and searching, and they had the Spirit of Christ in them, because he said they did, and yet they're looking for this, and they're trying to, with their writing, with their preaching and their prophesying, and they're exhorting the kings and the people, and in all different kinds of scenarios, but yet they're looking for this, the future, the Christ, the sufferings of the Christ and the glories that would follow. I'm assuming that's the majority of the prophets were doing that, not just one or two, based on that scripture.
Yeah, that's good, Chris. I would agree. I think they were, it's not to suggest that they didn't understand what they were saying. Sometimes I think people have this idea of prophecy that the prophet is almost unconscious of the meaning of his prophecy. So it's not that they don't understand, but the timing and the identity of the Messiah is beyond what they are given in terms of revelation, but nonetheless, God is speaking through them. And we talked a little bit about that when we were introducing the idea of a prophet along the first week of class. So understanding that divine revelation that's been given by God. So yeah, it's good. Okay.
Got a
Well,
comment?
yeah, Ron.
Yeah, I think in reading the prophets, a lot of what critical scholarship and liberal scholarship is, they're trying to always tamp down anything to do with the Messiah or any kind of actual prophecy. But like when I'm reading them, I have to be really careful, because I'm always wanting to push New Testament. Like, it's easy to see typology everywhere. It's easy to see everything referring to Christ or the Messiah, or without reading it technically, like you were saying a minute ago, really being careful about what specifically the author is saying in the passage. To me, it's very easy to fall into like, oh, this is about Christ, and this is about Christ, this is about Christ, when it may or may not be in that specific context. So I think that's a challenge, to be hermeneutically correct when reading the prophets, even from a conservative dispensational perspective. It's easy to go overboard with like typology and other things if you're not cautious.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would agree. I'm preaching through Joshua right now. I think I've mentioned this, but I know that there are unbelievers in the congregation there each week, and so I'm trying to end with a gospel message each week, which means I'm moving from Joshua to Christ. So then the question becomes, how do I get there? And some interpreters would say, well, Jesus is the greater Joshua, so whatever Joshua is doing in a given story, Jesus is the truer version of that, sort of like a typological connection point. And it's been interesting, but as I've gone along, what I've most often found is, to me, the best way to get to Christ is through analogy rather than typology, meaning this is like that, but it's something different. Just to give you one example, when Joshua 11, when the coalition of kings in the north confront Joshua and the people, it's this, all these regions are mentioned, and particularly the regions around the Sea of Galilee. And then in that passage is mentioned the Anakim, which are like these monstrous offspring. And so my point of getting to Christ in that passage was to say that Jesus also confronted a monster in the same area. That is, he confronted the demoniac, the demon-possessed man in the Gadarenes, which is in the same region where these kings were coming from to align themselves against Joshua. So all that to say, there's a lot of analogy that I think, a geographical touch point in that case, or an analogy in other ways. So making sure that we're reading it sensitively in its context for its original meaning, rather than extrapolating or force feeding New Testament truth back on it, is a good point, Ron. And I think we have to be cautious and wise about that. So it's good. Okay. So let me try to share some things here. There's some different things I can share with you guys that maybe will be helpful. Have any of you seen the archaeological discovery of the Bula that mentions Isaiah the prophet? Okay, Andrew says yes. Chris says no. A few, no. Okay, I might show a video about that because I think it's interesting just from an archaeological perspective to see that. But let me just introduce it. Let's see if I can get back to my right screen. All right, can you guys see that? Okay. Okay. Let me. Okay, so it says Isaiah and everything looks good. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Isaiah's prophecy. So here's one introduction to the book of Isaiah that says this. Isaiah is noteworthy in the biblical canon for several reasons. In length, it ranks second only to Psalms. Now, there's some dispute about that. I think that Jeremiah might actually be the longest book of the Old Testament. But anyways, its influence is clear, and its impact on the New Testament, which contains more than 400 quotations and echoes of Isaiah's language. More striking than such statistics, however, is the sheer grandeur of the book. The majesty of its dramatic language, the range of its theological themes, the power of its historical perspective, these all combine to justify the superlative language with which scholars, preachers, and poets have described this 66-chapter legacy that without exaggeration may be called the centerpiece of prophetic literature. Now, in Jewish tradition, Isaiah is juxtaposed with Jeremiah because the idea is you go from consolation to judgment. And so you have Isaiah and then Jeremiah. But it seems there's also a sense in which Isaiah kind of stands at the head of these different books because it's the one that is most majestic in its sweep and scope. There's something about the book of Isaiah that is unique among the prophets. I often say that there are 3 theological mountain peaks in the Old Testament: Deuteronomy, Psalms, and Isaiah, and that these are the books that most cast their shadow on the New Testament and shape the New Testament writers. And certainly Isaiah fits the bill. You know, if I could go back in time to any time in the Old Testament, I'd really be intrigued to go back to the royal court of Hezekiah, because Isaiah is ministering there, as is Micah, and it's just a fascinating time to have been part of what was going on. Eric Tully calls Isaiah a literary masterpiece, complex and sophisticated, providing a great theological overview of God's plan of redemption from the pre-exilic period to the consummation of history and the end of time. Isaiah is renowned for his prophecy concerning the suffering servant, which we looked at, his clear predictions concerning the deity and virgin birth of the coming Messiah, and his insightful depictions of King Hezekiah's reign. So all those things are fairly interesting and clear in the book. All right. As far as the history of the book, I don't know, how well do you feel is your grasp of history as far as Isaiah's background? Iffy, so? Okay. So let me I don't want to belabor it, but I'll say a few things here. He begins his book. I should have grabbed my other Bible. Okay, so if we look at Isaiah 6, the book of Isaiah is unique because many of the prophets give their call to ministry early in the book. I'm thinking of Jeremiah, for instance, that talks about being called from the womb to be a prophet. Let me just look at the book of Jeremiah. The words of Jeremiah, the son of Hilkiah, the priest, who were in Anathoth in the land of Benjamin, to whom the word of the Lord came in the days of Josiah. And it says in verse 4, then the word of the Lord came to me, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, before you were born, I set you apart, I ordained you a prophet to the nation. In other words, typically a prophet will say something about his call early on. But in Isaiah, he goes for 5 chapters before he gets to his call to ministry, or his calling as a prophet, which is in chapter 6. And I have the New King James Bible. I usually use the ESV, so sorry about that, but this was on the shelf here. In chapter 6, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim, etc. So he's spent 5 chapters talking about Israel's unfaithfulness to the Lord before he gets to his call. So he begins in a unique fashion, but it's during the reign of Isaiah that he has this majestic vision of the Lord, and that's part of his call to ministry. During the first half of the 8th century under Jeroboam II and Uzziah, Israel and Judah enjoyed respectively an almost unprecedented era of prosperity and influence. It's sometimes said that the dimensions of the land under Israel's control nearly fit the full scope of God's promises only during the time of Solomon and during the time of Uzziah and Jeroboam II. However, in this case, it's a divided kingdom, and it's a short-lived hold on the kingdom. But they were both strong kings. Jonah is ministering in the north, of course, during Jeroboam II's reign, as 2 Kings 14:25 tells us, and Isaiah begins during Uzziah's reign. So during this time, Egypt and Assyria were relatively weak. That won't be the case later on. Isaiah is ministering during the time of Hezekiah when Assyria is rising in power. But Uzziah becomes king at the age of 16. He reigns for 52 years. And 2 Chronicles in particular talks about how he was a builder, a man of the soil, that he invented these war machines. So he was an inventor, innovative, and those sorts of things. And so he was successful, and because of this he grew proud and stubborn, which results in his contracting leprosy, and so he begins a co-regency with his son after that point. All right, Tiglath-Pileser, when Jeroboam II dies, and with the death of Uzziah around the midpoint of the 8th century, Tiglath-Pileser rises to the throne and he becomes powerful. And so I have a section here about his leadership policies, and this leads to the confrontation eventually with Ahaz. So number 2 here, in 734, Tiglath-Pileser initiates a second campaign to consolidate previous gains, and so he confronts this coalition with Rezin and Pekah, who are allied against Assyria. And then Judah under Ahaz refuses to join this rebellion. So they approach Ahaz in order to try to force him to join this coalition, which then sets up the Isaiah 7 prophecy. Number 3, fearing the coalition, Ahaz rejected Isaiah's counsel to trust in the Lord and turned to Assyria for help. And then Tiglath-Pileser obliges Ahaz, and by 732 had forced Damascus to surrender, and so begins this siege and ultimate destruction of Samaria that falls under him. Tiglath-Pileser dies in 727. He's succeeded by his son Shalmaneser V, who comes to besiege Samaria, and then Samaria falls in 722. So the northern kingdom falls. Isaiah witnesses this during his prophetic ministry. There are a lot of refugees that come down to Judah. Chronicles tells us a little bit about that. Hezekiah, if you recall, sends messengers to invite some of the Israelites to come down and celebrate the festivals in Judah. And then Sargon II is the successor, and he's also involved because he is part of the confrontation of Hezekiah. Number 3 here, Sargon sends his forces on a third western campaign in 711 to crush Judah's co-conspirators. Having been warned by Isaiah of the dire consequences of resistance, Hezekiah submitted and paid heavy tribute that the other nations, along with the other nations. And then Sennacherib comes. Sennacherib is the one who takes over after it, and he comes back to try to destroy Jerusalem, and he boasts that he bottles up Hezekiah like a bird in a cage. So he comes west, and number 2 here in 701, he soundly defeats the combined forces of Egypt and Judah. Hezekiah promises Sennacherib an exorbitant tribute. However, Sennacherib is not placated by Hezekiah's pledge, and after taking 46 Judean cities, he intends to take Jerusalem. So Isaiah encourages Hezekiah to trust in the Lord for deliverance, and Hezekiah responds by pleading for the Lord to intervene. And this is the miracle that takes place in Isaiah 38 and 39, the last of the historical portions of the book of Isaiah. Isaiah in 37:21, Isaiah 37:21 sends a message to Hezekiah saying, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, because you have prayed to me against Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word of the Lord, which he has spoken concerning him," and then makes a prophecy that becomes fulfilled. Verse 36, the angel of the Lord went out and killed in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when the people arose early in the morning, there were corpses, all dead. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away and returned home. Sennacherib leaves and he goes home, and he's later killed by his sons, and Assur-Haddon, his son, reigns in his place. What's interesting is this is a newer archaeological discovery or suggestion that when Sennacherib returns, he depicts his Levantine campaign in the throne room of his palace in Nineveh. And included among the reliefs is what is believed to be a depiction of Jerusalem, and perhaps Hezekiah himself bearing his royal standard above one of the ramparts. So in the picture below, I'll scroll down to it in a minute, Hezekiah is depicted as number 1, marked by his bearing of the royal standard, a common Neo-Assyrian way to depict foreign kings. In other words, typically foreign kings would have their standard that depicts them as royalty. Other indications that Jerusalem may be portrayed include the 2-tiered topography of the city, which was true of Jerusalem with its upper and lower cities, as well as its multiple gates. So if I scroll down here, just to show you this, so this is from the throne room of Sennacherib. And if you look at the example here, number 1, you see this figure here atop a tower carrying the royal standard. It's been suggested recently in a scholarly paper, a peer-reviewed paper, that this is Hezekiah and that this is ancient Jerusalem. And there are several arguments made in its favor. One is that the city has 2 tiers, which Jerusalem had an upper and lower part of the city. The architecture is consistent with Israelite architecture or construction because they have what are called corbelled battlements. I think I describe it here. Let's see. Corbelled battlements, which are a unique architectural feature of the city, and then flora, which were native to Jerusalem, pomegranates, grapes, and fig trees. So if you see here the city, you'll notice how the ledges extend beyond the column. That is the column, and then you have these ledges that extend out beyond it. That's what they're referring to as a corbelled battlement, and that this was unique to Israel and seems to suggest that maybe this is Jerusalem. There are 2 gates here, number 3, and then the trees, because Sennacherib often depicts trees from these areas. These are all trees native to Palestine, the Levant. So perhaps this is Jerusalem. And if that's the case, maybe that's Hezekiah. Hard to know. Okay. The date, the superscription of the book identifies the period during which Isaiah ministers. His prophetic tenure extends from the reign of Uzziah through the reign of Hezekiah, and according to the reference to the accession of Assur-Haddon, even through a portion of the reign of Manasseh. In other words, Isaiah served from just after the middle of the 8th century through the first quarter of the 7th century. So it's actually a pretty lengthy period of time that he ministers. There's, again, this is a debated topic as to who has the longest prophetic ministry. So some say Jeremiah, but Isaiah certainly also has a long ministry, and this last datable event in 37-38 about Assur-Haddon places him even into the 7th century, which is more than a 50-year period. I can't remember if I have a number later on. The author, according to the superscription Isaiah, whose name means Yahweh is salvation, the son of Amoz, to be distinguished from the prophet Amos, was a prophet of the southern kingdom during the reigns of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. As such, he's a contemporary of Micah. His ministry overlaps with Hosea and possibly Amos, both of whom served in the northern kingdom. Little is known of Isaiah outside of his prophecy, and it's primarily confined to the references in chapters 6 to 8 and 36 to 39. Jewish tradition says that Isaiah was born in or near Jerusalem and that his father, Amos, was the brother of Amaziah, the father of Uzziah. This would make Isaiah a nephew of King Amaziah and a first cousin of King Uzziah, there are a few prophets that fall into this building. So Zephaniah was also a member of the royal family, and Daniel likely is also a descendant of David. So several of them fall in this category. This would explain why he has ready access to King Ahaz and King Hezekiah and members of the royal court. Number two, he knew the names of palace officials, and he was well acquainted with Jerusalem and its environments. And this is all consistent with the tradition, but does not prove it. A bulla or seal discovered in Jerusalem bears the inscription Isaiah the prophet, suggesting he identified himself as a prophet and sealed his official correspondence with this designation. Okay, what I'd like to do is show the video where this is described, and I'm going to make an attempt to do that. All right, so all right, I'm going to include sound. And all right, can you all see the video media player? Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to try playing it, and hopefully the sound comes through, and if it does, maybe you can just give me a thumbs up.
In December 2015, Jerusalem archaeologist Elat Mazar announced the discovery of an ancient clay seal, or bulla. The bulla contained an astonishing inscription. It read, "Belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah." This tiny artifact carried a sensational message. This seal proved the existence of one of ancient Judah's greatest kings and proved the accuracy of the biblical record. Dr. Mazar didn't know it at the time, but another bulla bearing an intriguing inscription was waiting to be placed under her microscope. The Old Testament record shows that King Hezekiah was a contemporary of Isaiah the prophet. The biblical books of Kings, Chronicles, and Isaiah show that this prophet played a central role in Hezekiah's remarkable reign over Judah. Today we have indisputable scientific evidence proving the existence of King Hezekiah. But what about Hezekiah's chief counselor and one of the Bible's greatest prophets? Is there archaeological evidence proving the existence of the prophet Isaiah?
Now, the bulla of King Hezekiah was part of assemblage. It didn't come by itself. First, we published King Hezekiah's bulla. That was the first thing. But then we studied the whole assemblage. And the whole assemblage contains more than 30 bullae. And one of them attracted our special attention. We were very skeptic at the very beginning. We didn't jump on the idea. It says Yeshayahu. Okay, fine. This is quite a common name. And then it says Nun Bet Yud Navi, which is in Hebrew, if you just listen to that, Navi, it's a prophet. So wow, Yeshayahu the prophet. This is, and then you have something nearby, which is Hezekiah, the King Hezekiah, near the prophet Yeshayahu. What fantastic. But then we needed to study it very carefully.
The Isaiah bulla was uncovered in 2009 during a small archaeological excavation on the Ophel. The Ophel area is located adjacent south of the Temple Mount and has furnished numerous important artifacts since it first began to be excavated in 1968. The Isaiah bulla was discovered in an area adjacent to what archaeological evidence suggests was a royal bakery from the First Temple period.
The debris that we were excavating is just below us. So where King Hezekiah bulla was found, just below here, where Brent is standing, and then the whole assemblage was spreading all over. So we first published this one and then worked on the other bulla just as well as on figurines and other important items. And just on the other side of this, the same assemblage, just on the other side of that Herodian wall that was disturbing that assemblage in its middle, that we found another bulla that is of Isaiah.
The bulla is small and can be divided into 3 zones or lines. The challenge when studying the Isaiah seal is that part of the bulla is missing and part is damaged. The damage was caused by a finger pressing against the soft clay when the seal was first created almost 2,700 years ago. You can still see the fingerprints. The fact that part of the seal is missing does not affect its interpretation. This is because the missing section is inscribed with an image or motif and not text. Dr. Mazar believes it was the image of a grazing doe, symbolizing prosperity. The text on the second line reads, Yeshayahu. Although one letter is missing, there is only one viable option for the identity of the missing letter. It can only be the Hebrew letter Vav. So the text on the second line is indisputable. It reads, Yeshayahu. This is the Hebrew word for Isaiah. But is this Isaiah the prophet? The text on the third line is incomplete due to the damage sustained to the bulla's left side. 3 letters can be deciphered, however, and together they read, Navi. Archaeologist Reut bin Aryeh has studied the bulla and explains why the missing letter is most likely an aleph, making the second word Navi, or prophet.
Among all the bullae from the excavation in the Ophel, we found this one. In its middle field, there was the name Yeshaya. So it was very exciting to read in its lower field the letters Nun, Bet, Yud, which suggest the word Navi, prophet. But there were 2 problems with this suggestion. First, the word Navi is usually written with the letter Aleph in the end. Second, most of the time in biblical Hebrew, titles after private names appear with a definite article, the, and we don't have that in our bulla. So it was more reasonable to say that it is a private name, Novi or Novai, that is known from the Bible and also from epigraphic findings. But by examining the bulla, I noticed that the borderline is seen only on its right edge and not on the left edge, which means the impression is not complete. If we continue the borderline, we can see that there is a space for 2 more letters in the middle register and for 1 letter in the lower one. Usually there is no empty space in the seal, so it makes sense to insert the letters Vav, Hey, and Aleph, and to suggest that this bulla was impressed by the seal of Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah the prophet.
While the presence of an aleph is possible and even likely, there are other interpretations. Professor Shmuel Achituv is an expert epigraphist and suggests Navi could refer to a place or surname.
It belonged to Isaiah, but that's all. Because it says Navi, Nun Bet Yod, which means Navi, but it lacks the Aleph. Perhaps Navi is to be pronounced Novi, Novai, or something else. Then that's a citizen or town of Nov. But of course, it can't be Navi, prophet. As I said, the lack of the Aleph. When we, in modern Hebrew, maybe pronounce the name Navi, You don't feel, you don't hear the Aleph, but it was felt, it was pronounced.
Although there are other explanations, the weight of evidence strongly indicates that this is the seal impression of Isaiah the prophet. Consider, first, it is indisputable that this seal is inscribed with the Hebrew name for Isaiah. While this name was undoubtedly common in ancient Judah, it is rare for an individual to have his own private seal. Only important officials or royalty bore their own private seal, so whoever this Isaiah was, he was important. Second, the position of the text in relation to the outer edge of the bulla suggests that there is space in which added lettering would almost certainly have existed. Third, consider too that there are only 3 potential options for the identity of the missing letter in Navi. The most logical and the most natural explanation is that it was an aleph. With an aleph, the word Navi means prophet.
Okay, I'll stop that there, but it's interesting to speculate that perhaps this is, in fact, a reference to Isaiah the prophet. I'm sympathetic to that view myself, so it's a possibility there as far as that goes. All right, thoughts on that, or otherwise I'm going to keep going here.
That was very cool.
Okay, good, I'm glad. All right, so with that in mind, let me go back to this. And all right, can you all see the notes again?
Yeah, it's amazing how small it was. They said it was only a
Yeah.
centimeter.
Right, it's almost the size of a fingertip. It's very small. What is interesting too about it is if that's a fingerprint that's preserved on there, you know, just thinking about, is that possibly Isaiah's own fingerprint that's been preserved in that bulla? It's kind of cool to think about.
Forensic files.
Yeah, right. Yep. Okay. So do y'all see my notes again now? You see that on the screen? Okay.
Yes.
All right, very good. So Jewish tradition, letter C here at the top, and Christian tradition, Justin Martyr, report that Isaiah was martyred under Manasseh's evil reign. These sources relate the prophet was placed in a hollow log and sawed in two, and it's commonly held that the Jewish tradition lies behind a reference in Hebrews 11:37 to such a martyrdom. So, you know, the writer of Hebrews talks about that. What is known from the Old Testament is that Isaiah was married and had at least 2 children. His wife, though she is unnamed, is called the prophetess in Isaiah 8:3. The 2 sons mentioned in the prophecy are given symbolic names. The first is Shear Jashuv, which means a remnant will return, and the second Maher Shalal Hashbaz means quick to the plunder, swift to the prey. According to 8:18, both he and his sons were appointed by God as signs and symbols to the nation. And in the course of his ministry, he composes this prophecy that bears his name, as well as a history of Uzziah's reign. 2 Chronicles talks about, and a history of Hezekiah's reign. So, you know, all of this is in keeping with his probable position within the royal court. So he has access to the king and even is a writer along these lines.
And one of the sons was pre-Isaiah 7 and the other one was after Isaiah 7, correct?
Yes.
So the virgin couldn't be his wife.
Right. Yep, that is true. All right, so his call takes place in connection with the death of Uzziah, as I said, in 740 BC. The conclusion of his ministry must have been after the death of Sennacherib, since he mentions Esarhaddon. So the length of his prophetic service, rivaled only by that of Daniel, was in excess of 60 years, or from the death of Uzziah in 740 BC to the accession of Esarhaddon in 681 BC. So that would have been about a 60-year period. So quite a lengthy period of time. In the Hebrew Bible, Isaiah is placed canonically at the head of the latter prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and the Book of the 12. Jewish tradition explains this placement as resulting from Isaiah's emphasis on consolation, especially in chapters 40 to 66, as compared with Jeremiah's emphasis on judgment. In the same way, in the Hebrew Bible arrangement, Isaiah follows the final book of the former prophets, 1st and 2nd Kings. Goswell explains this correlation. He says, in terms of macro-structural relations, the Kings-Isaiah collation in the Hebrew Bible, MT, helps to connect former and latter prophets, indicating these two canonical corpora are to be read in tandem. The former prophets in the book of Kings in particular, supply a narrative frame for the compilations of oracles by individual prophets that follow, starting with Isaiah. In the Protestant Christian canon, Isaiah heads the prophetic books section coming after the poetic books. This arrangement juxtaposes Song of Solomon with Isaiah, as the Song of Solomon ends and Isaiah opens with love songs pertaining to a vineyard as a metaphor for the speaker's beloved. So the Song of Solomon ends with a reference here to this vineyard. Verse 12, my own vineyard is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and those who tend its fruit 200. And so there's an invitation here to the vineyard. And then in Isaiah, we have this famous song of the vineyard early in the book, which is sung metaphorically about Israel. Let's see if I can get there. Now let me sing to my beloved a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. And so the books, in this case, foreground Yahweh's position as a spurned husband whose wife, Israel the vineyard, has refused to bear fruit despite his assiduous cultivation of the people. All right, one of the biggest interpretive questions about Isaiah is, of course, its connection as a whole, or its unity, the unity of the book. Let me pause this for a moment here and just ask this question. Have you all grappled much with the arguments for and against Isaiah's unity? Why might critical scholars, what are some of the arguments that they use against the unity of Isaiah? Are you familiar with any of this? Anybody? Not really.
Does some of it have? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say that it has a lot of it has to do with prophecy, which could not, if you'd have to believe that it was actual prophecy in order for it to not have been written at a later date.
Right.
So they assume that there are additional authors that added to the book later on.
Right. Right. Yes, that's true. So like, for instance, the fact that chapter 45 and verse 1 mentions Cyrus by name, thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held. If we take Isaiah as probably ministering up until Esarhaddon takes over, but not much beyond that, he's prophesying about Cyrus 140 years before Cyrus conquers Babylon in 539 BC, and he's mentioning him by name, which is pretty dramatic and spectacular. The tone of the book does change in chapter 40. Chapter 40 to 66 seems to have a bit of a different tone or approach. There aren't historical narratives like there are in the first half of the book. So in 1 to 39, we have these historical vignettes about Hezekiah. That doesn't really happen after chapter 40. And the argument goes that there's a distinction in the themes. There's less detail about the Levant, Palestine, where Israel is, and it's more generic. And so the argument was suggested that this was written by a group of disciples that follow Isaiah, or a second Isaiah, the so-called Deutero-Isaiah. And then Bernard Doom comes along and he argues that there's beyond this a third Isaiah, Trito-Isaiah. All right, so let me just say a few things about the unity here, and we'll take another break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about Isaiah, and then we'll end with a discussion of the handbook here, in case you have thoughts on that. Okay, so the traditional view is that Isaiah wrote the whole book, and that he it's a unified prophecy. One other argument along these lines is the great scroll, the Isaiah scroll in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which has no break between chapters 39 and 40. You can go to the Jerusalem Museum, Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and see this scroll. And I did, and I went over and I looked and saw like where it goes right from 39 to 40 with no break. So it was seen as a unitive book. All right, so this is what the critical scholars argue. I'm not going to get into their arguments too much because I think a lot of this has been rehearsed before, and you can read that. But just what are some arguments to rebut these claims by critical scholars? One is that the language and style of the book really doesn't change significantly in the sense that a lot of terms and phrases are used in both parts. One example, the Holy One of Israel, it's found 26 times in Isaiah, 12 times in the first half, 14 times in the second half, and only 6 times elsewhere in the rest of the Old Testament. So some of these are not as clear cut as they might say. There are themes and topics that continue in both. These would be designations for God, for Israel, the paring of Zion and Jerusalem, the ingathering of exiles, etc. The differences in historical perspective, number 5, can be really come down to the purpose of the two parts. In the first section, Isaiah warns his readers about the prospect of exile. In the second, he's depicting them in exile and seeking to encourage them. And so there's a lot of commonality there. Number 7, I'll just skip to this one. Isaiah's references to Cyrus, a century and a half before it appears, are only a problem if you reject prophetic predictions in general. And then we have external evidence. Jewish tradition uniformly ascribes it to Isaiah. The Septuagint gives no indication the book was anything other than a single document. The Isaiah scroll, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Jesus provides indirect witness when he's given the scroll of Isaiah and he reads from Isaiah 61, 1 and 2, so he reads from the second half. And then the New Testament writers support the unity. John 12:38 ascribes Isaiah 53, 1 to Isaiah, and then the next 2 verses ascribe Isaiah 6:10 to Isaiah. In other words, quoting from both parts and saying this is Isaiah. So the arguments against the unity of Isaiah based on internal evidence have all been adequately answered, and there is ample external evidence to substantiate the unity of the prophecy. So anyway, I think at the end of the day, it's the arguments are not persuasive against unity. So I think, as we might expect, a conservative approach to the book is going to see the book as a unified whole. So, all right. With that in mind, let's take another short break. Then we come back, we'll finish up Isaiah, and then we'll have a short discussion as we conclude tonight.
I'm working Thursday AM and I would not be available. Okay, comma. Let's see what we can do later. You might try a little Benadryl, which is 5 milligrams per kilo, to settle the stomach down and redose the Tamiflu period. If you can't tolerate the Tamiflu, comma, then you just have to write out the storm period. Fever control with Tylenol/Advil is the best go, with lots of fluids.
All right, we'll resume here if everybody's back and try to push through a little bit more tonight. I do want to have a discussion. You had an assignment for this book tonight, right? The Moody Handbook. So try to leave some time for that and see if there are discussions. I want to just talk a little bit more about some of the interpretive things. So let me bring this back up. And let's see here. Okay. So the occasion and purpose of the book. So we'll talk a little bit about this. There's within the book, one of the main themes is this crisis from Assyria and its resurgence. And so in the midst of that, when it seems that Hezekiah is going to crumble, that the Assyrians are on the rise, and the Davidic dynasty is perhaps imperiled, Isaiah comes, on the one hand, to reassure God's people, but also to indict, to some degree, God's people as well. So letter B here makes what I think is an important point in the book, that ultimately the crisis is a spiritual one. Israel's relationship with God has been established by the Abrahamic and Mosaic covenants. The Mosaic covenant regulates the day-to-day life of the nation. This covenant spells out Israel's responsibility as a covenant partner and the blessings God would give to the nation if it remains faithful to the Lord. And yet the nation had been unfaithful. And so letter D, in this context, Isaiah's ministry must be seen. The Old Testament prophets were covenant watchmen or enforcers, and so they're raised up to rebuke the nation. So Isaiah is rebuking the nation by warning them of impending judgment, but also reminding them that God will be faithful, and ultimately through the person of the suffering servant, who becomes a primary character, particularly in the second half of the book. All right, when we look at the theme of the book, although prophecies of judgment and salvation occur throughout Isaiah, nevertheless, it's generally recognized the principal theme of the first part is judgment and the second part is salvation. God is the Holy One of Israel who will punish his rebellious people, yet who will also redeem them. The nation is described as spiritually blind and deaf, a people devoid of righteousness and justice, a vineyard to be trampled. And these historical judgments foreshadow God's future worldwide judgment, the day of the Lord. In spite of this, Israel's mighty creator will have compassion on his people. He will rescue them from political oppression and spiritual darkness when he comes to redeem them. This is why the second half of the book is typically called the Book of Consolation, because it's a prophecy relating to God's promise to bless the nation. This is going to be through the coming of the child. You know, I think there's a through line, if you will, that the 7:14 prophecy, which speaks about a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, is to be related to the 9:6 prophecy, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. So we're to read these in light of one another, and then that future leader is further described in chapter 11 as spirit-filled from the lineage of David. 11:1, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, a root and a branch shall grow out of his roots. So the Spirit of the Lord will be upon him, and he will reign over the coming kingdom, which Isaiah also describes. The Lord, letter D, calls the Messiah my servant, a designation used also of the nation. So we see both of this in the second half. While Cyrus is identified as God's instrument to deliver Israel from Babylonian exile, it's the servant Messiah who delivers Israel from the bondage of sin. So letter E, it may be said the goal toward which Isaiah's prophecies steadily move is the Lord's future kingdom on earth, where a righteous ruler will exercise worldwide dominion and rule in righteousness over both Jews and Gentiles. The restored earth, along with the restored nation, will conform to the divine ideal and will result in God's praise and glory. So if we could boil down Isaiah's message, it's this: the judgment and salvation of the Lord. Or we could put it this way: The Lord will fulfill his ideal for Israel by purifying his people through judgment and then restoring them to a renewed covenantal relationship. He will establish Jerusalem as the center of his worldwide kingdom and reconcile the once hostile nations to himself. So that's the plan that is unfolding in the book. Now, as to the structure of the book, there are different ways to take this. One way would be to divide it in half, to see 2 volumes. And if you take it this way, you see a bifid structure being A, B, C, A prime, B prime, C prime, like the book of Jonah. So here you would have ruin and restoration of Judah, matching paradise lost and regained, then a narrative in 6 to 8, followed by a narrative in 36 to 39. And so there's a correspondence here, 7 parts in volume 1, 7 parts in volume 2. While this is intriguing, the overall layout seems to be somewhat imposed on the text rather than derived from it. And so most structural delineations of the book tend to focus on these 2 divisions. That is a book of judgment, 1 to 39, a book of comfort, 40 to 66. And so, you know, if that's the case, the historical interlude of chapters 36 to 39 are key to the structure of the book, linking the 2 chapters. Chapters 36 and 37, letter D, bring to a climax the material in 1 to 35, specifically the problem of Assyria. The Assyrians were an instrument God raised up to punish his wayward people, yet God will overthrow them. And chapters 36 and 37 conclude with the miraculous destruction of the Assyrian army. 38 and 39 form an introduction to 40 to 66 with their focus on Babylon. King Hezekiah's pride in showing off the palace treasures to the Babylonian envoy becomes the occasion for Isaiah to announce the coming Babylonian captivity in chapter 39. So he makes this prophecy when the Babylonian envoys come. Isaiah says this, hear the word of the Lord of hosts. I'm in Isaiah 39:5. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. That's often taken to be a reference to Daniel and his friends because they are mentioned in Daniel to be from the tribe of Judah. And Daniel, I'm teaching a class on Daniel in another seminary this semester. Daniel is described in the first part of the book of Daniel in a way that's very reminiscent of how David is described in 1 Samuel 16, being skilled, being wise, and all these. There's a piling on of attributes which sort of casts Daniel as a Davidic descendant, which would make sense if he's one of the descendants of Hezekiah here, and then he's put under the custody of the chief eunuch, which suggests that they may have been made eunuchs as well. Anyway, so Hezekiah said to Isaiah, the word of the Lord which you have spoken is good, for he said, at least there will be peace and truth in my days, which seems to be sort of a flippant, offhanded comment that betrays, I think, a callousness on Hezekiah's part. So letter F, the following exposition largely conforms to the divisions identified above. The book of Isaiah is something of an anthology of Isaiah's prophetic ministry. Isaiah recorded and arranged his prophecies, possibly with the help of disciples. I don't want to take that too far because critical scholars often assume that prophets had a large coterie of disciples who would help them to compile books. But it does seem that in this case, Isaiah did have some, because he says, bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait on the Lord. I will hope in him. So, you know, it's possible he has followers here. In any case, the chief interpretive task facing the reader is over the matter of fulfillment. The primary issue with interpreting Isaiah's prophetic predictions as well as the other prophets is to discern what has a near fulfillment, that is a historical one, versus an eschatological one. And so the best approach, of course, we would advocate is a grammatical, historical, hermeneutical approach to the text based on a straightforward reading of Isaiah's words. It is assumed based on the univocal nature of language, there is only one meaning for each text. In addition, the meaning of the text is that which the human author intended. It's based on the words he used, and those words are to be interpreted according to the immediate and larger biblical context. So that's what I would argue. So then there's an outline of the book followed by an exposition. So let me just scroll ahead. And so the exposition part over the course of, this handout is 123 pages here, gives an exposition of each section of the book. So I'm not going to go through that because, there's a limited amount of time we have tonight. But, you can look at this and, if you have interest or questions about any of that, that resource is there. Let me end by trying to do what I think is an example of the kind of reading that we're trying to do. And that's looking specifically at this Isaiah 7 prophecy. And I'm going to admit this is a work in progress. So it's something I've mulled over, and I welcome your feedback because I think it's a challenging text, but I want to try to handle it faithfully. So in Isaiah 7, we want to look at this prophecy. And if we note in Isaiah 7, it says, it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Assyria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told to the house of David. That's an important component here, because it's said to the house of David, which becomes significant because in verse 14, where it says the Lord himself will give you a sign, it's important to note that you there is plural. So within the context, how I would understand it is part of this prophecy is specifically to the house of David, whereas other parts of the prophecy are more specifically to Ahaz. All right, so with that in mind, this is my translation, which I don't necessarily like to throw in my translation because I don't want to pretend that I have the last word and all the other translations got it wrong. But I do want to, I have the translation here just to show what are some of the issues in this text. So note what I have here. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you, plural, a sign. So this seems to be beyond just Ahaz. And this is why I argue that in the context of the house of David, this part of the prophecy is for the entire house of David. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son. She shall call his name Emmanuel. He will eat curds and honey so that he learns to reject the evil and choose the good. Okay, now this is a challenging one because almost every translation says he's going to eat curds and honey until he knows to refuse one and choose the other. But in Hebrew, it's the lamed plus an infinitive, which Gary Smith in his commentary and others will say, and every other occurrence of this particular formulation always means purpose or result. So he will eat curds and honey. I would translate it so that, or with the result that, he learns or he rejects the evil and chooses the good. Indeed, before this boy knows to reject the evil and choose the good, the land from whose two kings you recoil in disgust will be abandoned. Okay, so that's my translation, but it's got some things I'm touching on here. One of them being, if you read Michael Rodelnick's treatment of this, he talks about how the article on na'er, it's the Hebrew word, young man, lad, suggests that it might be the introduction of a near referent. In other words, he might be then referring to the child in front of them. What child is that? Well, the child that he's brought with him. Notice 7:3. The Lord said to Isaiah, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashuv, your son. So what I see as possibly happening here is before this boy, the lad, meaning this one here, Shear-Jashuv, perhaps. We don't know what his age would have been, but that this boy might stand as a near horizon prophecy, that the land from whose two kings you recoil and discuss, that would be who? Well, the ones mentioned at the beginning of the chapter, uh, Pekah and Rezin, that those two kings, their land will be abandoned or forsaken. Okay, there's a lot of complexities here, but I'm trying to work through the text, and what I see is possibly the way I would read this is verse 14 being a predictive prophecy about the future Messiah, and then verse 15 also being about the period of time in which the child will live. So for instance, the curds and honey, what do they mean? Well, again, within this immediate context, verse 20 says, in the same day the Lord will shave with a hired razor with those from beyond the river with the king of Assyria, the head and the hair of the legs, and also remove the beard. It shall be in that day that a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep. So it shall be from the abundance of milk they give that he will eat curds. For curds and honey everyone will eat who is left in the land. In other words, what this suggests is that the destructive nature of the kings, the foreign kings coming, will remove all the crops and ravage the land, so the only thing left to eat are curds and honey. So it's a suggestion of a period of deprivation due to oppression by a foreign king, which certainly is the case during periods in the immediate horizon of Isaiah's day, as is also the case of the Messiah's day, when foreign kings are oppressing. And so it's sort of he's coming of age or growing up in a time of deprivation, in a time of foreign oppression, and in a time in which these foods are the ones that are available for him to eat. All right, then we have Matthew 1, 22 and 23. All this happened to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bear a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel, which is rendered God with us. Okay, so there's a historical overview of what's going on here. I'm going to kind of go through that, just scroll past that and get down to the survey of interpretations and just kind of tell you what I think this is saying, and then see if you have any questions or feedback. All right, so there are 3 main approaches. One is to take the prophecy as exclusively historical. A young woman who may or may not be a virgin at the time of the prophecy marries and gives birth to a son. Some identify the woman as Isaiah's wife and the son as Maher-shalal-hash-baz, or some otherwise unknown brother. And they point to the fact that at the end of this prophecy, in the very next chapter, 8:3, I went into the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. And the Lord said to me, call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. Before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be taken away. Now that would seem to connect to the earlier prophecy, right? So I can kind of see why some might suggest that this is a fulfillment of the 7:14 prophecy. However, it runs into some difficulties, as we'll see in a moment. A second approach is to see 7:14 as exclusively messianic. The woman, a virgin, is married, the son is Jesus. Opinion is divided over the meaning of 7:15 to 16. Some take it as describing the experience of Jesus. Others distinguish the reference to Jesus in 7:14 from the child mentioned in 7:15 and 16, and take that to describe a child in the 8th century. I'm inclined to perhaps be leaning towards 7:14 and 15 as describing the future Messiah, and then 16 referring back to, verse 16 referring back to the immediate horizon. A third approach combines the two and sees something of it as a double fulfillment. The initial fulfillment takes place with the birth of a child shortly after the prophecy, and then the subsequent fulfillment takes place with the birth of Jesus. This is explained in one of 2 ways. Some see this as sensus plenior, Matthew's importing this meaning back into the text. Others take the relationship to involve typology, where Matthew takes Isaiah's words as foreshadowing something beyond their immediate context. This is what Chisholm does. Rodney Decker, I don't know if you know that name, but he was a well-known New Testament prophet, Baptist Bible Seminary, and he was my first Greek teacher. He took it as typology as well, which I was sympathetic to initially, but I've changed my mind on it and taken it instead as exclusively messianic. Okay, so with that in mind, let me just say a few more things, and I'm going to open it up and see if you all have any thoughts about it. One of the big questions is, what does the word Alma within this context mean? It's often argued that the word used here, Alma, does not mean virgin in the technical sense, rather a young woman, a sexually mature female of marriageable age. Furthermore, that if Isaiah had intended the idea of a virgin, he would have used the less ambiguous expression betula to communicate that. An evaluation of the Old Testament evidence, however, does not support these contentions. The expression betula is used 51 times and is generally regarded as a common word for a sexually mature young woman who is unmarried and chaste, that is, a virgin. However, the term has a broader semantic range and is even found to describe a woman who has recently been married. As well, when used to describe a young woman who is a virgin, the expression can take additional qualifiers to make this explicit. Whether these qualifiers are restrictive, narrowing the meaning of the term, or descriptive, the implication is that such are unnecessary if the expression were an unambiguous term for virgin. The expression Alma, on the other hand, is found only 9 times. 2 are used in connection with musical notations. Of the remaining 7 uses, the expression appears to overlap that of betula with the idea of a sexually mature young woman who is unmarried and chaste, that is, a virgin. With this meaning, a young unmarried woman who is a virgin fits all 7 uses. And then there are a couple passages where betula and Alma are used in the same passage, and betula is qualified, whereas Alma is not. So it does seem that the best view is to see Alma as meaning a virgin, which would really restrict this against Isaiah fulfilling this by having another son with his wife in chapter 8. All right, so a lot of these views have problems. If you take an exclusively historical approach, it's hard to know who exactly is being addressed because there's not a virgin within the immediate context, nor was there one born who would be called Emmanuel, God with us. The child that is born is called Maher Shalal Hashbaz. So I think this has a lot of problems. Now, some see the exclusively messianic view as also having problems. And the problem with this view is that, the timing of it in terms of curds and honey, and then verse 16, before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good. So that seems to be a more historical reference. So you could potentially see a problem there. The third problem also appears to have problems. Importing a meaning from the New Testament is, I think, inconsistent with authorial intent. That is, we try to understand what the original author is saying in the context before we move to the New Testament. I think that that's an invalid approach to do it. And the typology view, I'm, I guess, more sympathetic in the sense that there are some that are conservative and messianic interpreters, dispensationalists, who take this view, but I'm not sure it's very clear in the passage that we should be seeing a type here. I think rather that if we read it in the light of chapter 9, 6, and 7, the coming son is the same son upon whose shoulder the government will rest, and that he will be called Mighty God, just as earlier he's called Emmanuel. So seeing these two in tandem is, to my mind, a better way to go about it. So as I said, my preference is, I'll just say this verbally, is to see 14 as a predictive prophecy about the coming Messiah, and 15 as a description of the time in which he will be born, a time of deprivation and a time of foreign oppression. And then verse 16 as switching back to the immediate contexts and taking this as sort of an asseverative use of key, indeed or truly, before this child, meaning I think perhaps returning back to She'er Jashuv as an example. That's how I would understand it, and I recognize that there are potential problems there. It's a difficult one, but Matthew does seem to be reading it as a predictive prophecy. All right, does that make sense? Any thoughts or questions on the passage or what I explained?
No, I guess I appreciate that. The immediate 4 verses right before it seems to give me the context where God is challenging Ahaz. Hey, come up with something. Ask me for anything. And Ahaz says, I'm not going to do that. He says, well, all right, then I'm going to show you an incredible sign, and it'll be so big that the entire house of David will literally think it's inconceivable. And then he says, behold, let me find the word. The Lord himself will give you the sign. This is when Ahaz refused even to do what God told him to do. So he couldn't think big enough. And God says, okay, you're not going to do it. I'm going to show you something that's totally inconceivable, that there will be a virgin that will conceive, which is inconceivable. And only God could do that.
Yeah, good point, Chris. I think you're right. It's to the house of David, and it's a sign for the house of David, and it's something remarkable. To your point, I think you're kind of alluding to this. If it's just a child that's about to be born, what's so miraculous about that as a sign, right? So Isaiah's sons are symbolic in some sense. Their names mean something, but they're not a miraculous sign in the way that this particular child seems to be for the house of David. All right, so you guys are all convinced, or it's too late for you to care? One or the other.
Well, I guess I would go ahead and say I don't think it's a double fulfillment. I think it's a single fulfillment, and it's a single fulfillment in Jesus Christ, because it cannot be the son of Isaiah, because he already had a son and his wife wasn't a virgin. And so there's no way that she could be almost a virgin because she's already had a baby. No, she's not a virgin. So it can't be her. She's ruled out immediately.
Right. So then you have to argue that Alma can just mean a young woman. But again, it doesn't seem to be the best understanding of that term. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I guess I persuaded everybody. That's great. Go ahead.
Would we
Steve.
have access to your document? That's a lot of information to absorb and digest. I was wondering if we could see that at another point. Did you post that already?
I did. Yeah. It's I posted it as the last file in the Isaiah section of the homepage.
Oh, there it is. I see it. Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Isn't I mean, Alma, of those 7 verses, aren't all of them related to a virgin? You've got Rebecca, you got Moses' sister Miriam. In Psalm 68, you got the maidens or the virgins. Proverbs 30:19. You've got the way of a man with a virgin. You know, no one can understand that. And we're all men here, so I think we can understand that.
Right.
Song 1:3 referring to virgins. Song 6:8 referring to virgins without number. And then obviously 7:14 about virgin. And then what is it? Bethula. There's 50 different times when it could be, either way.
Right. Yeah, I think so. I think it's a pretty strong case. I mean, admitted, I can't say it's airtight because I can see that people would argue against that. But I think, as to your point, Chris, every occasion where Alma is used, the best understanding would be it's a virgin, a young woman who is a virgin. So, yep. Okay. How about this book? So you were to read the prophetic sections of the Moody Handbook of Messianic Prophecy. Anybody want to share your thoughts about this book? Did you find it helpful? Do you think they're overstating their case, or are they generally persuasive in these various essays that we read? I'll just say that, when I went to seminary, I went to a conservative seminary, but there still seemed to be a bit of a resistance to just like sort of jumping in with both feet to see a significant number of passages as being overtly messianic. And, I was sort of trained to almost like follow the critical approach, but doing so from a conservative point of view. I myself, as I've matured in my understanding of Scripture, and I'll lay my cards on the table, I'm much more sympathetic to this approach, and seeing that the Old Testament writers did have a clear vision of the Messiah. I've been very influenced by John Sailhammer, who's influenced many of the editors of this volume, Seth Postel, others that write in this volume. So I'd be curious about your thoughts. Do you think they're overdoing it? I have to say, it's some of these chapters, and I've read beyond the chapters that we're discussing tonight, and there are occasions where I thought to myself, I'm not sure about that particular messianic view, because I don't want to like force it beyond its original domain. And yet I think for the most part, I'm sympathetic to much of what they're saying. So anybody want to share your thoughts on the volume? Did you find it helpful? Or do you have any, feedback or thoughts on it?
Well, I guess I was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the Messiah in the Old Testament. And it made me want to take each one and put it into a devotional. And I couldn't do that because I didn't have enough time. I totally want to go back and even preach a series on all of them or something, if at all possible. But I thought it was amazing. Excellent. And the people who the contributors were, the 50 some contributors, the majority of them, I highly like.
Good. Yeah, I used this in December. I preached a series called Christmas in Genesis, and I was looking at how Genesis anticipates the Messiah. I looked at the life of Joseph, looked at Genesis 3:15, and I think the book is quite helpful to see how there are patterns that anticipate the Messiah. All right. Anybody else have feedback on it? Michael?
Yeah. Also, the overly messianic instance sometimes can be misleading. However, I, for one, was so intrigued by the fact that he also looks at the issue of the Davidic covenant that is emphasized by the different latter prophets in the context of God's redemptive plan and also fulfillment.
Yeah. Yep, that's good. So a clear, I think you're right that there's the trajectory of the covenants that become a key piece to later prophecy. So picking up the Davidic covenant, which is a clear through line in many of the prophetic books, is important, as we were talking about even with Isaiah. So, okay, good. Anybody else? Don't want to force anybody, but if you have thoughts. Yeah, Steve.
It was a bit overwhelming and very technical, but I think each author made their case fairly well, and they were able to sort of shrink it down to some basic ideas. One of the things that I found intriguing, because I agreed with it, was simply this: that he referenced in the former prophets. He was talking about Samuel's, and he said, one of the biggest things that reflected Christ, and I think that's important to say it that way, is the storyline was paralleled some things about the Lord Jesus, and that was David and Goliath. But I think there is, which is just to complete that thought, the archenemy of Israel was terrorizing them as if they were already dead, paralyzed in the fight. Very similar to he who had the power of death, that is a devil, and all our lives we lived in fear. And we needed a champion to come across the field of eternity, and that was like what David did, and defeated the foe and released them from their, basically shackles by fear. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And yet I think there are actually quite a few others that you could pick up. For example, I think the story of Abigail is a very telling story, where you have a fella that is basically a real scoundrel fool, deserving of rightful death by the king-elect, and you have Abigail who steps in and saves his life, and even says, which is a King James Version translation, "On me, my Lord, on me let this iniquity be." So I enjoyed that aspect, although I obviously have to be careful of stretching it too far, but the parallels I think were very nice to see.
Yeah, good. Okay. That's helpful. It's encouraging. I think it's a book that you can use going forward if you're looking to do a study on a certain book, just kind of picking it up and seeing where some of those messianic themes might be, to really draw out, I think, what I think is a beneficial and helpful approach to the Old Testament, which isn't shoehorning Jesus into passages where he's not intended to be, but seeing where the authors seem to clearly be leading in that direction, and picking up those patterns and cues, which can help us a lot to see how the portrait of Jesus gets filled out in the Old Testament. So suddenly, it's certainly the case that Jesus doesn't just drop out of heaven with no prophetic import or background, that he's been very clearly predicted to come in the manner in which he does, and a lot of truth about his character and life are in the Old Testament. So, all right. Okay, well, gentlemen, I think we'll leave it there for this evening then. Thanks for the discussion, and look forward to next week. So next week, you have an exegetical outline for one of the books, I think, is the assignment, in Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Ezekiel. Chris, you have a thought, question?
Yes, on that, thank you for bringing that up. What kind of detail are you looking for? Because these are obviously long books. Is it down to the verse level, down to the paragraph level, down to the word level?
Yeah, Chris, it's hard for me to answer this question because all of this was created for me as templates.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know what the mastermind behind this is looking for. I'll just say, for me personally, I'm not a big proponent of busy work, which this could easily devolve into just busy work, and I don't want to necessarily do that. So I would say I'm looking at more along the lines of multiple chapters. So seeing the big headings, but certainly not going down to the level of individual verses per se, but maybe having Roman numerals, capital A, 1, and then maybe letters under that, but trying to keep it at more big picture kinds of thinking. So I don't imagine this is going to take you, a long 20-page whatever. It's going to be much more concise than that.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that question, Chris.
Mine is quite a bit more extensive than that, but it was crafted off of some previous work that I did in Isaiah, so it wasn't
de novo.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I don't want you to be surprised when you look at it.
Okay. All right. Fair warning. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. All right. Well, I hope you all get a good night of sleep, or a good coming day wherever part of the world you are. Thanks for hanging with me tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care.
Thank
All right,
you.
thanks.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
God bless.
Bye.
Evening. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Michael, how are you, brother?
I'm okay. How is your evening?
Good. So school started today, huh? Or starts today? Or no, today's tomorrow for you. So it started yesterday.
Yesterday, yeah, it's now coming to 6 a.m. So in another day.
Yep. Yeah, another day.
But we started off well.
That's awesome. Well, good.
Yes.
So everyone's back in school, and your Bible school starts up here shortly.
Yes, shortly in 3 weeks' time, we do official opening ceremony.
Ah,
We've
fantastic.
invited quite a number of guests here and there, and also in the church, for them to have this opportunity.
Yep, that's awesome.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, everything's going well here. Today, February 10th was Lindy and my 14th anniversary. So,
Oh my God!
we,
Congratulations!
yep, we're very excited about it.
Wow. Pray that
So,
you'll enjoy better and greater decades ahead of you too.
yes, yep. She's definitely a gift from God.
Amen.
So, well, but you guys are doing well. You don't need anything right now, or?
Well, continue to pray with us in that area, especially the preparations, that
Yep.
they will go well. And also this, like I explained, the perspective about Bible training in Africa is something that really need God to help us. Yet there are many mistakes that are being done. But we know that in this season, God can help us open the eyes of the people, such that they can value biblical training. Because the other is our children to complete the different requirements at school also. It is my earnest prayer in this season.
Yep.
Yes, please.
Well, definitely praying for you and our whole cohort. So, well, brother, I guess I'll let you go. And I don't know where Paul was tonight. I miss seeing him.
Oh, by the way, I noticed the 8th person is missing out.
I didn't see Paul Bohr tonight.
Need to follow up. I'll send him a message too.
Okay. Yep. All right, brother. Well, love you, and we'll see you next week.
Love you too. Thank you.
Right,
Greetings to Lindy.
I will. All right. Good night. Good morning.
Good night.